Hey everybody, how are you all doing this evening? I hope you're doing well. My name's Matthew and I post videos every Monday and Friday. So if you love the tingles to you, tingles, then hit that subscribe button because you are in the right place. Now today's video was kindly suggested by Adriana, and we are of course looking at the story of Dorothea Puente. Now, again, this is a case I've never heard of until Adriana suggested it. And this case, I've had a quick skim through, looking at different articles, and I was shocked with who Dorothea was. It was not what I was expecting at all. So let's get into this story. So Sacramento police were no stranger to the tidy Victorian at 1426 F Street. As they went up the steps of the blue-green home on November the 11th, 1988, a miniature windmill turned lazily in the neat flower-filled front yard, and birds chirped from a decorative wishing well. The officers knocked on a slight, white-haired woman in a Coke bottle. White-haired woman in Coke bottle glasses opened the door. The landlady, Dorothea Puente. Police asked if she had seen 51-year-old Alvaro Montoya recently. Montoya was definitely disabled, and his social worker was worried after losing contact with him for weeks. His last known location was as a tenant in Puente's home. She said she didn't know anything about Montoya's whereabouts, but gave permission for the officers to search the property. It wasn't long before they noticed a patch of disturbed soil in the yard. An officer asked Puente if they could excavate her garden. "Dig in my yard," she said. "I don't know what's out there." They dug, and within minutes they were met by a stomach-churning find: the decomposing body of a woman. In the flurry of calling detectives and forensic teams, Puente, dressed in a long red coat and carrying a bright pink umbrella, slipped out. A few hours later, Sacramento Police Lieutenant Joe Inall spoke with the media and gathered at the growing crime scene on F Street. As body after body came out of the ground, Inall admitted they had no idea where Puente was. "She went for a walk," he said, "and never came back." Well, I'm just saying, should they have let her go for a walk whilst they were digging that up? Maybe. Probably should have kept more of an eye on her. Anyway, Dorothea Helen Gray Puente was born in Redlands, California on the 9th of January 1929. Her childhood was marked by tragedy. Her father died of tuberculosis when she was 8, and her mother died in a motorcycle crash a few days after Christmas the next year. The children were sent to an orphanage. By 16, Puente was doing sex work out of a motel to survive. As World War II came to a close, she started seeing a 22-year-old soldier, Fred McVall. A few months later, they married in Reno. On their marriage certificate, Puente listed herself as a 30-year-old. Sharila A. Riskell. I butchered that. She could pass for anyone she wanted to be by the way she acted. Rizal. Does anyone know how to pronounce this word? Riscile. That was a made-up name. McFowle said in 1988, I don't know where she'd come up with this shit out of a clear blue sky. There was very little married bliss for the McFowles. They had 2 children, but one was sent to live with family in Sacramento and the other was adopted in 1948. Puente was arrested in Riverside for passing a forged check. McFowle filed for divorce and Puente went to jail. The ensuing 2 decades were a cyclone of marriages, arrests, prison sentences and schemes. She served time for running a brothel in Sacramento and gained a reputation with law enforcement for sneakily cashing benefits checks mailed to her tenants. To avoid probation officers, Puente frequently used fake identities, including telling people she was an Egyptian-Israeli woman named Tia Signola. Can't say that. She comes up with a lot of aliases. Husband number 4, Pedro, knew her as a doctor actor from a big Mexican family. Their marriage was driven into the ground due to her spending habits. She wanted new pantyhose every day. Montalvo complained to Sacramento Bee. She thought she was rich. In 1968, she married Roberto Jose Puente, whose name she would keep longer than the marriage. 16 months after the wedding, the relationship was over. Now in her 40s, Puente transformed her appearance. She'd always been known for her brassy, sexy makeup and dress, but suddenly she began wearing baggy, modest clothes and stopped dyeing her hair. She told new acquaintances that she was a devoted Christian and loved serving her community in Sacramento by opening up her lovely home on F Street. She took in the homeless individuals and people struggling with alcoholism and mental health issues. She hosted AA meetings and local social workers knew her as a reliable placement for her clients. In 1982, a tenant named Ruth Monroe died in Puente's house. The coroner ruled Monroe died of an overdose of codeine and another drug that I can't pronounce. In an interview with investigators, Puente said Monroe was despondent and likely intentionally overdosed. The death was ruled as a suicide. Not even a month later, police returned to the boarding house after another tenant, a 74-year-old retiree, said Puente had drugged him. While drugged, he claimed she'd have stolen from him. Puente, who had been given several years probation in 1978 for cashing dozens of her tenants' benefits checks, was sentenced to 5 years in jail. Bored in prison, Puente found herself a pen pal, 77-year-old Oregon resident Everson Gilmouth. When she was released in 1985 after serving 3 years, Gilmouth drove down to California to pick her up. He expected they would marry soon after. But in November 1985, Gilmouth fell off the map. Puente hired a worker to help her do some small renovations around the house, including constructing a 6-foot by 3-foot box with a lid She said it was for some trash she wanted to discard. When the worker returned the next day, she asked him to put the heavy box in the back of his pickup truck so he can dump it on the side of the road. They drove down Garden Highway into Scudder County, where Puente picked up a spot by the Sacramento River to leave the box. 2 months later, on New Year's Day 1968, a fisherman saw what looked like a floating coffin in the water. Wisely, he decided not to open the box and instead called 911. Police discovered a dead man inside. It would be another 3 years before Gilmouth's body was identified. His unsuspecting family was still receiving letters on his behalf, written by his new girlfriend, Puente. Finally, though, the walls closed in on Puente. In November 1988, police arrived at her home to look for Montoya. As they excavated her backyard, they found 7 bodies, most wrapped up in sheets or tarps. One body had been there so long, the growing roots of a peach tree had curled around it. Oh my god, that's horrific. They were identified as Leona Carpenter, 78, Montoya, 51, Dorothy Miller, 64, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 64, and Betty Palmer, 78. Distressed neighbours told the media they had complained for months about the smell coming from the neatly kept backyard. We couldn't stand it, one told the San Francisco Examiner. It definitely was something dead. It had a sweet, sickly smell. When confronted, Puente said it was just fertilizer. That was not the only red flag about Puente's boarding house. A neighbour said Puente was territorial about the property. If somebody walked on her lawn, she'd cuss at them in language that would make a sailor blush. They said a taxi driver who regularly picked up Puente so she could run errands said she exclaimed she had a cursed room in her room where people died all the time of bleeding ulcers. Her tenants always seemed to be disappearing, but because Puente often took in struggling or addicted people when social workers asked after them, she said they must have just moved along. One Sacramento social worker wept as she talked to the Examiner. I've done placement with homeless people, helped them to get money and stabilise their lives, she said. Now I wonder if they would have been better off if they'd stayed homeless. Meanwhile, a manhunt gripped the region as the innocuous-looking landlady walked away from the scene. She made it down to Los Angeles, where she immediately found her next mark, an older gentleman at a bar. While chatting him up, the man recognised her from the television coverage of the murders and called the police. When Sacramento TV station KCRA learned Puente had been picked up in LA, they flew down on a private jet to cover the story. Eager to get her charged back in Sacramento, detectives asked KCRA if they could take the chartered plane back up with Puente in tow. KCRA agreed on the condition they could interview Puente on the flight back. Detectives wouldn't allow any questions directly related to the murders, so the interview was short and strange. Puente said she used to do extensive volunteer work and been putting on a faraway expression, murmured almost theatrically, I used to be a very good person at one time. Well, those words are haunting. She was charged with the murders of 8 tenants, including the previously ruled suicide of Monroe and her one-time boyfriend, Gilmouth. Prosecutors allege she drugged each one, strangled them, and continued to collect their benefits. She hired day workers to dig holes in their backyard and then dumped the bodies and refilled the holes. After a month of deliberation, the juries returned a guilty verdict on 3 of the 9 counts of murder. It was enough at last to put her in prison for the rest of her life. Okay, but is there more? Puente died in Chowchilla Women's Prison in March 2011. She was 82. Can we just go back to, after a month of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on 3 of the 9 counts of murder. What happened to the other counts? Why just 3? I'm sorry, there should have been 9 counts of murder, not 3. How? I'm baffled. I'm absolutely baffled. But the weird thing is, she looks like a sweet old lady, so you would just never suspect. I mean, to be fair, you could say it was like the perfect crime, although it wasn't because she got caught. But I was shocked. I was actually shocked that she turned out to be a serial killer. But it just goes to show anyone could be a serial killer. But I'm sorry. How was she only charged guilty for 3? I've got questions. I don't understand. I don't understand that whatsoever. Oh, it's really raining hard. Can you hear that? Well, I hope you found this video to be interesting and relaxing. I have found this case to be eye-opening. I'm still in shock that she was only guilty on 3 instead of the full 9. But thank you for the suggestion for this case. It has been very interesting. And if you have any other cases you find interesting that you'd like me to read and find out about, then leave them in the comments below. And in the meantime, sleep well, and I shall see you guys